like from the measurement of 1 second was absolute. So even Einstein's theory of relativity had two absolutes. How many of you can follow what I just said? I'm just curious. You can do it. You can. All right. Probably got about 2 or 3 I would say. But anyway, so and what he was saying, Einstein, that there were some absolutes. Now here's what I have against the idea that there are no absolutes. It leads to a complete nihilism, just a complete chaos in your thinking. Your thinking has no purpose and direction. Anything at all can be true and nothing is true. At the same time, everything is true, while at the same time nothing is true. Believe what you will, folk. But just now, keep this in mind about no absolutes, because I'm going to come back to it in just a minute when I come to the next figure. And for those of you who aren't awake, I think this might get you awake. The man I want to talk about next is Socrates. All right, Socrates. He believed, and this is something that some New Age people agree with, that knowledge resides inside a person. And all it takes is questioning that person to bring that knowledge out. Now, there are times when questioning is a good way to get a person to learn. But I'm just curious. This is important, but you don't need to know it. But how many of you know how tightly the nuts on your cylinder head of your car have to be torqued? I had one person who said he knew that. I don't know it on my car. Now, it's important, because if you don't tighten all the nuts the right way, as that engine works, it's going to eventually come apart and fall to pieces. So our engineers have figured out now all the nuts on the cylinder head have to be tightened evenly, because you don't want more pressure on one. So as the piston's moving down, all of the nuts on the cylinder head are carrying an equal amount of pressure. That way an engine, today's engines last 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 miles without being serviced. But if you get one nut tighter than another, that one nut is eventually going to break the whole engine apart. Because first one nut comes loose and another one. But again, if you don't know that, you don't need to. But somebody does have to know that. But the point I'm making is all the questioning that I could do would not bring it out of you if it's not in there in the first place. Not in your head. I mean, okay, now. On a personal note, my wife sometimes will ask me a question. She doesn't like the answer I give. She'll ask the same question. You say, wait, I've already given you the best answer I can give you. All the questions you can ask me will not get another answer from me because I don't have one. So the other day, she did the same thing to me. I asked her a question. I asked her before. She said, hey, now, I've already given you the answer to that. So can't give you another one. All right. Anyway, he believed that the best way to get things out of a person was a question and answer method, which a lot of people today will go along with and use. Now, he believed that there were no absolutes, and he questioned every area of the Athenians' life, including their religion. He's famous for the statement, know thyself. But folks, I've read more about this. Number one, it was not original with him. It had already been said by others before him. And number two, it's impossible. Now, what would any of us do if some gunman were to come into the room right now? None of us really. Now, what's more, what we might do this time might not be the same thing as what we might do another time. The ideal thing for us to do would be all the men to rush at him. Some of us would be killed in the process, but we'd overpower him because we outnumber him. That'd be that. But how many of us would do that? I'm not sure that I would. That's what we should do in a case like that. Everybody just rush him. Pell-mell. Well, men and women alike. Maybe grab your chair desk and use them as a shield and rush at him. But again, none of us know what we do. All right. Now, there's a man up in New England who's, every time he goes somewhere and the people learn he's an expert on Socrates, they'll ask him one question. Did Socrates really say that too much freedom leads to tyranny? As a matter of fact, he did. Socrates was an admirer of the Spartans, even though he was an Athenian. But now, and I wanted to tell you, folks, when I was younger, and this may still go on, A lot of American professors were admirers of the Soviet Union. In their mind, in the Soviet Union, everything worked perfectly. Everything was so great. The people there were all employed, and everybody was wonderful and happy. And the government was very efficient, not compared to ours, where our government was in a state of chaos, and where our Senate and House were disagreeing with each other. And our judges often disagreed with our president. Isn't that awful, folk? No, it isn't. We believe that everybody should have a freedom of speech. They looked on as the Soviet Union as being an example of an ideal state. And one professor wrote a book, and within a few days after publishing her book about how great the Soviet Union was, the Soviet Union collapsed. This actually happened now. But anyway, Socrates was an admirer of the other side. Yeah, the grass always looks greener on the other side until you get over on the other side, and oops, the grass really was greener back there where I came from. Anyway, he was an admirer, but he said that in the city of Athens, it's gotten so bad that the animals do not obey their masters, the children do not obey their parents, the people do not obey the government. He said this doesn't go on in Sparta. Maybe because Athens had more freedom, and I should remind him. Socrates, go to the year 2018, and you'll find that Sparta has 200 people living in poverty in the mountains, and Athens has more than 2 million people. Freedom is the best way, but he believed that too much freedom led to people demanding, and this is something we run a risk of, folk. People eventually might demand that somebody take over who could bring order. Now, in the land of Singapore, right after they got their independence, they tried democracy. And it got to where you'd better get 10 men armed to go with you every time you stepped down the grocery store. Then along came Liu Yan, a dictator, and he used a practice called caning, where he would beat people with a heavy cane administered by a martial arts expert. And the people of Singapore loved it. What's so great about caning? Today, the women in Singapore can go take a stroll through the park at night and feel safe. He brought order out of the chaos. Now, the bad people in Singapore did either one of two: either they changed their ways or they left. Now, an American young man named Michael Fay, who had what we call attention deficit disorder, basically was a bad person, went to Singapore and spray painted some cars. Liu Yan's men caned him. They were going to cane him 6 times, but President Clinton made a personal phone call to Liu Yan, and they got it reduced from 6 to 4. Michael Fay had to spend some time in the hospital. Then he left Singapore and has never gone back. I mean, when those people hit you with a cane, you stay hit. But again, it brought order out of the chaos. And the people of Singapore just loved it because they knew, hey, we were really terrible. But it also brought a lack of freedom. All right. But again, Socrates would have favored Liu Yan, I'm afraid. And now, he believed that ignorance was the cause of evil. Educate people, don't be evil anymore. Remind me, I heard the story of 2 prisoners talking. One of them said to the other, you're going to always be just a common crook. I said, when I get out, I'm going to go to college, and while you're still a common crook, I will be an extortionist. In other words, I'm going to be a high-class crook. I'm going to be a white-collar crook. But you'll still be a petty thief down here. And also, I would like to take him to Germany before World War II. It said Germany was one of the most enlightened nations in the world, and guess what? They followed Adolf Hitler. Again, some of these things that he was so keen on have not proven the test of time. But he believed that the problem of evil would be solved by education. And folk, obviously, I hope you all know I believe in education, but it will not make you turn you into a good person unless you choose to be. Education, right thinking will not solve the problem of evil. He believed they would. Now, folk, here's the part. I've got 10 minutes that might wake you out of your seats. Socrates believed that he was buddies with a demon. The Greek word D-A-I-M-O-N. He said he once visited his demon friend and found this demon friend lived in a huge palace, more magnificent than anything he'd ever seen on earth, and was attended to by myriads of servants. This demon walked alongside him and whispered things into his ear. And a lot of his ideas came from this demon. He had another reason why he was a friend of the demon. Socrates who had a problem with homosexuality, as did all Greek men. Now, folk, if you might notice, I mean, I'm a little bit terrified of this subject. This is one subject. But nevertheless, the Greek men liked young boys. And Socrates is no exception. However, Socrates fought against this urge because he believed it was wrong. So he claimed that his demon friend kept him morally upright. Socrates married a woman, and he had 3 sons. We know the names of his sons. We also know the name of his wife. Now, about his wife, there are some accounts that say she was a shrew, but no account of a person while she was alive. No original source says that. The ones who say that were written hundreds of years after she would have died, but basically that she was a very hard to get along with woman. Be that as it may, Socrates also said that today's wives in Athens don't obey their husbands. Whatever. Anyway, Socrates believed his demon friend was keeping him from these boys, and I will say this while I'm on the subject. Socrates, for people who pride themselves in good looks like the Greeks did, Socrates was horribly ugly, even by Greek standards. One of the ugliest men who ever lived. I mean, if you see a painting of him. But nevertheless, the young boys seemed to like him because he was a famous person, and they thought they could use him as a stepping stone to get higher. But he was able to resist them, supposedly because he influenced his demon. And you might say to yourself, hey, I thought that demons tried to get you to do bad. Yes, here's where the demon did a double cross. The demon got his confidence by telling him, I could keep you from the young boys. But then the demon told him, now, here's some philosophy that you need to follow. The philosophy is basically, there are no absolutes. Socrates was to teach Plato. Plato was to teach Aristotle. Aristotle taught Alexander the Great. But everywhere that philosophy touched, the philosophy of those 3 men, Socrates, it destroyed everything that they touched. It destroyed Greece, it destroyed the Hellenistic world that came after, and ultimately destroyed the Roman world, and I think it went a long way towards sending Western civilization into the Dark Ages. That might be a slam, and that's not what you normally hear, but basically this is what I think happened with Socrates. So in other words, his demon buddy did him a lot more harm and did all the rest of us a lot more harm than they did good. Now, you might just say, all right, I want to say this, folks. 90 to 95% of the world's people down through the ages have believed in spirit beings that float around invisible. The Muslims call them genie, and almost every Muslim believes in them. Christians often call them devils or evil spirits. Call them what you will. But today's, of course not. The fundamental assumption of today's academia is there is no spirit world. There is no God. There is no afterlife. That all we have is what we can weigh and measure. Fundamental assumption of today's academia. Therefore, they look on Socrates as having a form of epilepsy. That anyone who claims that he's in contact with the spirit world and the spirit's talking to him is said to be epileptic. And that Socrates could be helped or could be cured today with the right kind of medicines. Julius Caesar also was said to be epileptic. Alexander, I'll get to why when we come to the chapter on Rome. Alexander the Great is said to have been epileptic. No, none of them had seizures. I mean, you may think of epilepsy as being seizures. No, epilepsy can take many forms. And if you look up Socrates, there is a name for the type of epilepsy he has. I did some research on it recently, but I can't recall the type of name for it. But there is a name for it. In other words, he was deluded into a belief that he was being influenced strongly by demons. Now, he claimed, wait a minute, just a minute. Make a long story short now, I've got to close. He believed, pardon me, not believe. He was finally brought before the Council of 500 and tried on a charge of corrupting the youth. Very important. Now, the Greeks might have had a charge to bring against him. What they should have brought against him was a charge that he was pro-Spartan. That basically he was pro-enemy. Instead, I had a woman in this morning's class who was surprised to find out that I'm a father. I mean, it's on the syllabus. I mean, I have 3 children, and when I was young, I did not see, well, what's so wrong about worrying about corrupting the youth? But when you have children, you wonder, Will they follow in my footsteps? Will they have my values? Will they believe the same way I do? You want to try to get your children to believe the same way you do. And sometimes they influence you. Like when my son was 12 years old, we were walking down the streets of Orlando. And you know, if I would have been alone, if I'd have looked both ways and saw no traffic, I'd have stepped up a little street. But when you're walking with a 12-year-old son and you want to teach him right from wrong, you've got to walk according to the law. He knew what the law was, and he made sure that I only crossed the street, only crossed the street when a red light gave me the permission to. I'll admit, I'd have done some jaywalking if he had not been there. But all right. Maybe the idea is you try to teach your children right from wrong. The Greeks did too, and they accused him of corrupting the youth, and the fact that he's claimed to be friends with a demon also had a lot to do with that. Socrates was condemned. Then they had to try him again to determine what sentence. The first trial, the charge of corrupting youth, only resulted in a sentence of about a vote of like 270, 230, and that's round figures, but did not result in a heavy vote against him. But then he started smart-mouthing and acting arrogant toward the council and asking, what right do you have to try me? So when they voted for the penalty was death by voting more than 400 to 100. You know, they voted overwhelmingly for the death penalty, partly because he acted really smart. When the time came, he cheerfully drank the hemlock and died. Now, keep in mind one thing, then I'll close. He was 70 years old, and he said already he noticed the decline set in. Men who he once could beat in a foot race, he was still running a foot race, but men who he once could beat were now beating him. He engaged in a wrestling match, and men who he once could beat were now beating him. He said, all I've got to look forward to is losing my vision, losing my hearing, losing my mind, and losing control of my bowel and bladder functions, and just becoming a crippled or invalid. He said, I really don't want to live that way. So he felt like his life was behind him, so maybe he had an easier time drinking the hemlock than most of us would have who are younger than him. Of course, I'll be 70 in 9 months or so. But anyway, he was up there in years, and he felt like he had nothing much to look forward to in life. But again, the Athenians would have been better off in the eyes of most historians if they would have tried him on the charge of being in cahoots with Sparta. As it was, though, the Council of 500 wound up getting a really bad name for himself, as did democracy. All right, folk, we'll take up from there next time. Now, you're a little behind the other class, but that's okay. I'll try to catch you up. I'll see you on Wednesday. You are dismissed. Oh, yeah, one personal thing. Today is my 30th wedding anniversary. Don't expect to see the video on tomorrow afternoon sometime. Today it is, yeah. Oh, yeah, and one other thing. The Greeks believed that Cupid went around with arrows and shot them into people's hearts, and if some nearby you fell in love. If any of you have a better explanation, I'd like to hear it. They at least knew that there was something spiritual that went on, and it was not a purely physical thing. You know? All right, we'll take care of that.
All right, have a good one.